Good morning, guys. It is Monday, February 27th, 2023. This is Bathrobe Business. I am George Yoganoff. Good morning. It is the start of a new week, and it is also the last week of February. So this channel is going to be officially 2 months old tomorrow. Very proud of that and happy with it. We're still a small channel, and I like that we're still finding ourselves and still developing what the content of this channel is going to be, but I've been enjoying it so far. And to those of you that have liked and subscribed and watched the videos, thank you. And I hope to bring you better and better content as the channel grows. Let's get into the news stories of the day. So let's start with EVs because there's a couple stories about EVs in the market. I always like EVs, even though I don't own an EV, drive an EV, or actually want to own an EV. I'm actually an internal combustion engine guy, honestly. I have an Infiniti. I love it. I think it's a great car. I think there's a lot of drawbacks for EVs, but it's a great market right now because it's an emerging market. Everybody's getting into it. And because of that, I think it's very newsworthy. So there's two stories on EVs. The first is with Ford. So Ford is in a little bit of trouble right now, but in all honesty, this is kind of the problem with EVs in general. So I guess one of the lithium deposits that have been used for Ford batteries, specifically for the Ford F-150, has been poisoning areas in the Amazon. Never anything you want to hear, but unfortunately this is kind of par for the course for EVs in general. So EVs, that lithium has to come from somewhere. Its mining operations are still very archaic. It still uses strip mining. It strips a lot of the earth. It deposits a lot of minerals into groundwater, river water, lakes. It's very toxic. A lot of the chemicals used to extract and refine the lithium are incredibly toxic. And this is one of the biggest drawbacks for EVs, despite also the fact that EVs don't actually offset carbon. We say they do, but they really don't because that power comes from somewhere. And the dream is that power is going to be coming from renewable sources like, solar, wind, nuclear. But in the current environment, they're still coming from a hydrocarbon at the end of the line. At some point, there's a power plant creating power from a hydrocarbon. So that's one issue, and it's going to continue being an issue with EVs as more EVs come to the market. Everybody's getting into the EV market, and that's actually what our second story is about. And we're going to have to deal with this environmental crisis. There is a company right now that is trying to recycle lithium ion. There's actually a ton of companies doing that right now. One that just got a government grant as of today. I think it's a $600 million government grant, and they're working on being able to recycle or refine lithium. I think that's a great idea. I don't think it's also realistic as well. In all honesty, I think all recycling programs always just cost more money than they're worth because of the energy input and into the logistics of just collecting the raw material itself. But obviously you do need something because the current situation would just have us strip entire mountaintops for the next 50 years. And the amount of lithium we're going to need just for the California law that everything has to go EV by 2035, I think we have to mine more lithium in the next 50 years than we've mined in our entire history. So we're going to need a ton of lithium, so any kind of recycling is probably better than none, despite the fact that I think it is going to be very costly. And again, it's not going to be carbon neutral. Recycling is very energy intensive. Just think about recycling an aluminum can. All the energy that has to go into that, finding the aluminum, refining it, stripping it of all its impurities, and getting it recycled. It actually is less expensive to do it just by mining, simply because there's an infrastructure there already. And infrastructure for mining is always going to be lower than infrastructure for recycling, simply because that's how the beast is made. And you already have such a net loss in carbon by the time you make that aluminum can to then also refine it. So that's the first story on EVs. Coffee. Second story is about a new EV company. It actually isn't new. Those of you that know Fisker, Fisker's actually been around forever. It's been bought and sold like 3 different times. It's been originally started by, I believe, a guy from BMW, the guy that made the i8. I don't know to what involvement, if he was the designer, the president of the project, or whatever. But it began as a branch, I shouldn't say branch, but he began as someone from the BMW EV line starting Fisker, and this was probably over 10 years ago. And this thing has been bought and sold like 3 times. Last I heard, it was owned by a Chinese company, but here it is back again. So they're set to deliver 40,000 units of a SUV by the end of this year. So we'll see if that happens. Fisker actually was a pretty good looking car. It looked a little bit like an i8. It was very stylish, but they could never seem to get it off the ground. There were mechanical issues, there were distribution issues, there were funding issues. They started shortly after Tesla. I mean, it was a good amount after Tesla. Tesla, I think, had a real head start with a lot of these EVs, but I think they did start around the same time as Lucid Motors, and they predate Rivian for sure. So they've been around for a while, but just have had issues. We'll see if this actually happens, but it does show that the EV market is heating up, and that one way or another, whether it's with current and established brands or new brands, EVs are going to be coming from the market. I do believe that most of those 40,000 units have had pre-orders on them already. So there's a demand for it. It's almost like you can release any kind of EV and people will just buy it. A great example of that was a couple of years ago with Nikola, which eventually did end up collapsing because it was almost like a Theranos scenario where they didn't really have the technology they claimed they did. They faked a lot of their stuff, even their commercials of trucks driving around on their electric car batteries was all fake. They literally used like downhill footage. They just put a truck on a hilltop and just had it roll downhill and said, "Oh, look, this giant semi is driving with nothing but lithium-ion batteries." It was all garbage. None of it was true. And so we'll see what happens with this brand. But again, another EV line coming to town. Next story. So consumers. So 2 top retailers issued cautious U.S. consumer outlook for 2023. So this is about Walmart and Home Depot mostly. I'm just going to read this article verbatim, not the article, but just the main points from the article. It's just on CNBC.com. It says Walmart said consumer spending would start strong this year, but fade. Home Depot expects revenues to be flat this year, but bolstered by home equity. The retail sector has its worst year since July 2022, and yet the latest inflation and retail sales data shows consumer spending to be strong and stronger than economists forecast. So again, a very confusing market, and I think this plays entirely into shifting demographics, how people are spending their money, who's spending their money, and where. So 2 large retailers, Walmart and Home Depot, had fairly bad quarters. I don't think they were as bad as people have reported. There were slips, and it was mostly from the prognosis for the rest of the year that people are very apprehensive of the retail market right now. But people are still spending money. Consumer spending is actually still up, and they're just spending it in very different ways. And in my channel previously, I've talked about how shifting demographics is part of that, shifts in culture, shifts in who's the primary spender as far as generations go. Like I said before, boomers are no longer the primary spenders. It's mostly millennials and Gen Z right now. And because of that, they spend money differently. So here is another great example to kind of my theory of why we're going to see a lot of movement from big establishment brands to smaller brands. And I would say that the Fisker story I just covered is a great example of that. Back in the day, if EVs were starting up, most of the boomers would probably go to established brands like Ford, GM, etc. Nowadays, all of these startups are getting the most attention because younger generations are gravitating less to the established brands and more to whatever is new. Fisker is a great example. This car company is quote unquote new. It's come and gone for the last 10 years, but it's a new brand and people are gravitating to it because there's something fresh and new about it. And that's a millennial and Gen X kind of purchasing style. That wasn't true of the boomers. Here's another article that kind of illustrates that shift from establishment and big business to smaller and niche. This is just kind of a personal profile of an entrepreneur. I'm just going to read the headline. It says how a 27-year-old raised over 1 million to build a platform for African designers. And it just has a little subquote, "We know our problems better than anyone else." So a lot of people just discount this as an ESG story. I don't think it is an ESG story. I think it's just a story about a young entrepreneur. But a lot of people will say, oh, that story is only getting traction because of ESG and trying to appeal to diversity, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a very cynical way of looking at it. But even if that's true, this does show a trend in the market, right? Because millennials are going to pay attention to these kind of brands. They like a brand that is non-establishment, that is going against the grain, that they believe is doing and correcting something in the market. And how many brands do you see that are doing this? Even the big corporations try to get in on it, right? It doesn't make any sense for Lockheed Martin, a company that makes a Hellfire missile, to support Pride Month. It makes no sense. Those are really just trying to capitalize on a trend. But a lot of these smaller companies are going to exploit niches in the market of social issues and different types of new trends in order to find a new business model. And millennials and Gen Xers like that. They gravitate to that. So you're going to see more fragmentation of the market. The good news is you can literally start a business and go head to head with big competition, because whereas before you would have this massive obstacle of opposition from the market and distrust of people saying, well, who are you? Why should I buy from you? I can buy from an existing brand. Now it's quite the opposite. People are asking existing brands, why should I buy from you, this massive corporation, when I could go and buy from a young new brand that's doing something better than you are? So now there's a distrust of large corporations and more of a trust for small corporations. I think the next 10 years are going to be the years of entrepreneurs and the years of new brands. You can literally start any company now and grow it to a very successful scale, no matter what the sector is. How many mattress brands exist now? How many sneaker brands exist now? How many home utility and toiletry brands exist? Jeremy's Razors, the Dollar Shave Club. There's a million of these companies that don't really make sense, right? Why would you buy from this? But because they're new, because they're not part of big established brands, they're getting traction. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it doesn't take a whole hell of a lot of investment. It definitely does, and it takes a lot of money to get your name out there. Don't have people fool you. Social media marketing is exceptionally expensive. It is not inexpensive. It's more expensive than billboard campaigns. I know because we've done them. You can easily sink 40 grand into a social media marketing campaign and have less reach than you would if you did a billboard campaign. So social media marketing is incredibly expensive. But whereas before you would just be blasting the market with all of your ads and getting no traction, now you actually have a chance at traction like you never did in the last 30 to 40 years. So this next 10 years, 20 years, whatever the term is going to be for Xers and millennials' purchasing power, is going to be the era that's defined by small business, fragmentations in the market, and a rise up of new startups. Lastly, let's just get to general market news. Our economy is doing fairly well. The market is up. It's pre-market right now, 240 points. S&P is up 34. NASDAQ is up 137. Our good old friend gold is up slightly at 1822. There was a story yesterday that gold hovers near 2-month low after gold hovers near 2-month low after U.S. data fans rate hike fears. So this story is talking all about the fact that gold is going down because interest rates are going up. I semi-agree with that. Obviously, interest rates are going to lead to more returns on bonds. Bonds are directly correlated to the strength of the dollar, and therefore gold would decrease in relation to the dollar. I don't necessarily agree with that statement entirely, simply because gold was going up even when interest rates were rising. So when Jerome Powell was raising rates just last month, gold was near record highs, right? That's when I was reporting to you guys that something's coming in February, and I was totally wrong because then the market reversed. But that was right after the Fed rate hike. So Jerome Powell had raised interest rates and gold continued to rise. So I don't think this is tied at all to interest rates. This is tied entirely to the strength of the economy, which I know I'm like the only one on YouTube talking about. The economy is doing very well, despite what you may think. I just think it's more of a shift in purchasing and demographics that's causing a lot of this chaos. So the U.S. economy, we're getting more and more jobs. Job rates are record lows, the lowest since 1969. That's the unemployment rate. Hiring keeps continuing, despite the fact that there's been layoffs in a few sectors. Unemployment is low, wages are high, spending is high, booking on vacations is high. All this plays into the gold market. And again, I don't own any gold. I don't buy any gold. I just think gold is a great indicator, and I think gold is responding to the strength of the economy. We've just had record-breaking growth month after month, and gold is just reflecting that more so than the interest rates. That's pretty much it. That's kind of the story for today. I got to get to work, so I hope you guys have a great week, start of a new week, start of a new month. So I hope you set amazing goals. I hope you meet those goals, and I will see you guys hopefully back here tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.